Welcome to the Certitude of the Catholic Faith. I'm John Veneri, and we are continuing our discussion primarily with the Catechism of Pope St. Pius X. And we are right now going through the existence of God, on a study of the existence of God from reason. But in the previous program, what I wanted to talk about, and I'll be talking about it more in this program, is this wave, this trend we have right now of scientists who they're on a crusade to drive religion from the hearts and minds of men, claiming that because I'm a biologist, I can tell you that God doesn't exist. Because I am a physicist, I can tell you that Christ worked no miracles. As I said in the previous program, this would be like calling a vet to fix your car. Okay, your vet might be very good at what he does, but he's not a car mechanic. A biologist might be very good at what he's done, but he's outside his field when he wants to proclaim some sort of absolute that there is no God. The scientist is incapable of proving that God does not exist. He can rant against it. He can argue against it. Some are pretty good, actually. They're good thinkers. But the vast majority out there, the people like the Richard Dawkins and the Christopher Hitchens and the Daniel Denton, I think that's his name. I don't want to mispronounce it. But anyway, they produce caricatures. They produce a caricature of religion, and then they attack it. Or they are dealing with things that they don't fully understand themselves, or in realms of philosophy, we might get to this a little on in this program or maybe the next, they are bringing up objections that were answered by St. Thomas Aquinas 800 years ago, and answered well. They just pretend that these objections have never been answered, that they are the first in the history of the world to ask the question, if everything goes back to God, then who made God? I got you there. Well, no, that was answered by St. Thomas and men like him centuries ago. And I'm not going to leave it suspended in the air. We will be answering that question either this program or the next, depending on how we go. But these are things that can be answered and have been answered. But one of the problems we have now is kind of a misunderstanding of what science is anyway, because science is looked upon as just this general body of knowledge that's out there in books and theorems and things like that. Yes, that's part of the mechanism of science, but if you gave that definition of science to someone like Aristotle, truly one of the greatest minds that ever lived, I can't think of one person living today that could go toe-to-toe with Aristotle, he wouldn't define science that way. Science, scientia, is knowledge. It is what you know. It is the operation of your intellect abstracting information and holding it. It's part of our human nature that we can do that. And this truly is science. And how do you know what is true? How do you know that you know something? Well, Aristotle says, in order to have knowledge, you have to know that something is true. You have to know why that it's true, and you have to know why it can't be otherwise. Okay? I'm going to say that again, because you will find, even if you question yourself about things that you hold, you may find that you really don't know things you thought you knew. Okay? Again, we're going to say it again. You have to know that a given thing is true. You have to know why it's true, and you have to know why it can't be otherwise. And only then can you really say that you know something. Now, another thing about empirical science. We're talking about these militant atheists who mock religion, who claim that there is no such thing as religion, who claim to find contradictions and all of that, but they claim to do it in the name of science. Now, we think of science, empirical science, that is science that is developed through observation and experimentation. and coming to conclusions. It's wonderful, it's great, it's marvelous. But we always get the idea, because this is how they should be, number one, scientists should be, and number two, that scientists present themselves, that they are objective. They have no agenda. They have no preconceived notions, okay? They will be objective, and they will follow the evidence wherever it leads them. That is a true scientist. He will follow the evidence wherever it leads him, okay? Evidence alone matters. Dr. Waters, our philosophy professor, God rest his soul, always said that evidence alone matters. You have to show your evidence. So, is this what we find with these modern, many, I think most, but I'd say most maybe, but too many of modern atheistic science? Well, I'm giving the game away. Let me read the quote and see if what you find here is objective science that will follow the evidence wherever it goes. A biologist named Richard Lewontin, he wrote this in the New York Times Review of Books, January of 1997. He said, it's kind of a long quote, he says, "Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural." Okay, between nature and supernature, between just this world and God. I'll explain it. We take the side of science. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failures to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Now, when he's saying materialism, this is being filmed during the Christmas season, we tend to complain about Christmas being too materialistic. It's just, and we equate that with consumerism. Okay, materialism means that your child goes through what used to be called the Sears catalog and says, "What do you want?" "I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that." Turn the page, "I want that, I want that, I want that." Then turn the page. Adults are like that too. "I want that, teach that. Okay, this is kind of a materialist consumerism, just wanting things, wanting the car, wanting every gadget that's out there, an iPhone, an iPad, and I can't help it. Everything. You want it, okay? I'm not talking about that type of materialism. The type of materialism that Professor Lewontin is talking about is the belief system that says there is only one thing on earth, and that is matter. Only matter exists. Only things that I can touch or taste or feel or sense or smell or look at through a microscope. Matter is the only thing that truly is. So when he says we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism, this is what he means by materialism. He goes on, the only thing that can exist is matter. Okay, there is no supernatural. This quote gets better. He says, "It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produced material explanations." Okay? We have a preconceived notion of what we want to do, what we will accept as explanations, and what we have to set up to explain things to keep to our preconceived notions. No matter how counterintuitive, he says, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated, moreover, he says, this materialism is an absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Close quote. This is what this scientist is saying. We start with materialism. We will not accept anything that is contrary to materialism, even if we find the evidence for it, and our commitment to materialism as such is that we will not allow a divine foot in the door. He's not the only one. A physicist, Paul Davies, says science takes as its starting point the assumption that life wasn't made by God or by a supernatural being. They're starting with that. This is a preconceived concept. Okay? He goes on, the scientists do this mainly because they don't really want to open the door to what they call religious fundamentalists. But he does say that the scientific investigators do feel uneasy about stating that the origin of life is a mystery. They can't really explain it. And he says, and this is a direct quote, behind closed doors, they freely admit that they are baffled. Now, the purpose of science is to find the cause of things. That's what science does. You find the cause of something. Here, they have a preconceived principle that they will not accept God as a cause. Okay? UCLA's professor, Tyler Burge, he says materialism is not established or even supported by science. This is an amazing admission. Materialism is not established or even supported by science, and that its hold over his peers is analogous to a political or religious ideology. Close quote. Now, is this objective scientific inquiry? Starting with the claim, we refuse to accept God as the beginning and source of all things, period. No. To use the modern terminology, this is prejudice. This is bigotry. This is closed-mindedness. Now, you know that those three things, prejudice, bigotry, and closed-mindedness, the superstition is that the stupid people on the street might be prejudiced and bigoted and closed-minded, but the scientist, he is above all these petty things. He is above such mean-spirited thinking, such shallow thinking. Well, what do we see here with these atheistic scientists who refuse? They admit it themselves. We will not allow for the supernatural. We will not allow for God. And that's our starting point? Huh? That is prejudice. That is bigotry. That is closed-mindedness. And they don't like this, it's not even true science. You can't claim to be on a scientific inquiry, a scientific journey, and absolutely shut out the existence of God as the first cause of all things, the existence of the supernatural. Okay? You can't just shut that out because even, who is this, Paul Davies? No, it's a Tyler. Materialism, he says, the shutting out of the supernatural is not supported by science. So, what happens then with the scientists? What do they do? How do they come to these conclusions? Well, one of the ways they do it is, now I'm going to say something that you might sound a little hard to understand in the beginning. I might be using terms you're not really familiar with hearing every day. But stick with it. Stick with it. What the scientist does is he makes, I'm not saying all scientists, again, please, I don't want to get, letters, you're saying all scientists are bad. No, all I'm saying is that it is a trend now of many scientists, and if the shoe fits, wear it, okay? But I'm not saying that all scientists act this way, but it is the trend right now, because did you know 95%, Dr. Burnett told me this, 95% of today's biologists are atheists. That means that's what's being taught in the scientific schools. That is the climate. And if someone wants to rise in science, he's not going to talk about his belief in God because he might be mocked, because it might change his A+ to a C-, because Scientists too and professors are wounded with original sin and will not always act justly and honestly. Okay? So, you have the scientific world that this is the trend right now. Science must be atheistic. So, what does the scientist do? The modern scientist do who is following this trend? Well, and this is not me, actually, you'll see I'm quoting a real authority on this. I'll get to him a little later on. He makes a metaphysics out of his method. Now, metaphysics, of course, is the basic principles of being, the basic principles that support everything that we have. The fact that there is a God who created all things. Okay, the fact that human nature is constituted a certain way. A fact that there is a natural law written into our hearts by this God. There is the principles that you learn in metaphysics. Okay, you may not have heard these terms before, don't worry about it. But the principle of sufficient reason, the principle of efficient causality, the principle of non-contradiction, the four causes, the formal, material, efficient, and final causes. These are all part of the metaphysics, the basic foundations of reality, not just theories that are out there, but the basic foundations of reality that 2,500 centuries of Western civilization has been built on. The trend in modern science is to kick that away, to claim that metaphysics, this basic Aristotelian metaphysics, has nothing to offer today. It's just vapors. It's just somebody's idea. And we're going to replace it with science. But what happens is even though they claim, I did cover this in a previous program, we're going to be coming at it from a little bit different angle. Even if he says, well, I don't need metaphysics, I don't need any of this, he can't just state it. If he's a scientist, there's 2 points to this. Number one, if he just says, well, the old-fashioned metaphysics are just, they're just theories and we don't need them anymore. Well, if he's really a scientist, he just can't make the statement. He can't merely assert it. He has to defend it. He has to show that what he's saying is true. And here's the fun part. As soon as he tries to defend it, point number two, as soon as he tries to defend it, he will refute it. Why? Because scientism, and you can't defend what's called scientism or positivism against metaphysics because you can only state any position by using metaphysics, by the principle of non-contradiction. If I say Aristotelian metaphysics is nonsense, I can't also simultaneously be saying the opposite, that Aristotelian metaphysics is necessary. I have to use the principle of non-contradiction that Aristotelian metaphysics gives us. You understand what I'm saying? So you have to use these things. I reject the principle of causality. I reject that everything has a cause, and I say this because, you see the contradiction? I'm saying I reject the metaphysical principle that everything has a cause, and I'm going to give you a reason for it. Well, once I say because, I have accepted causality. There's no getting away from it. He has to use the word because. So, and the point is these points I've talked about in metaphysics. I'm not going to stay on this much longer, but the point is that principle of non-contradiction, principle of sufficient reason, principle of causality, these basic building blocks, foundational things of really are the foundations of science, they don't come from biology. They don't come from physics. They don't come from differential calculus. The science that proves these principles of reason and guards and defends, they don't prove them. They guard and defend the principle of reasons is metaphysics. All right, but this problem has been going on for a while. There's a philosopher and a historian of science named Professor E.A. Burt. Now listen to what he wrote in 1952. A classic book he wrote called The Metaphysical Foundations of Modern Physical Science. And I said, don't be afraid by these terms. This is actually very easy to understand. You'll see once I explain it. Now let me quote Professor Burt. He said, now the history of mind reveals pretty clearly that the thinker who decries metaphysics. So you see, I'm not just making this up, that this problem, I'm not just claiming this problem exists. He's showing this problem exists. They want to get rid of metaphysics. They want to claim it's useless. And he wrote this in 1952. Okay, this problem has been going on for a while. Now, the history of mind reveals pretty clearly that the thinker who decries metaphysics, if he be a man engaged in any important inquiry, he must have a method, and he will be under a strong and constant temptation to make a metaphysic out of his method. In other words, what should be the basic foundation of science, Aristotelian metaphysics, he's going to throw that away, but whatever method he has chosen, then that will become the new foundation of anything. Inasmuch as the positive mind has failed to school itself in careful medical thinking, its ventures at such points will be apt to appear pitiful, inadequate, or even fantastic. Okay? So he comes up with a brand new theory. His method becomes his foundation for everything. And another professor who deals with these things, Dr. Edward Feser, he points out that this, what Bert described here, describes the new atheist to a T. They get rid of old metaphysics, but they substitute their method for the foundation of everything. And what is Richard Dawkins' method? What is the new method? Evolution. Okay, they take away metaphysics, they replace it with an evolutionary analysis, and that becomes the foundation. It becomes the master key to every scientific and philosophical problem. Everything must be explained by evolution. We saw this. Some of our viewers will recognize this name in a pantheist modernist priest named Father Teilhard de Chardin. Here's what he said. Threw away metaphysics, he replaced it with evolution. Is evolution a theory, a system, or a hypothesis? It is much more. It is a general condition to which all theories, all systems, all hypotheses must bow if they are to be thinkable and true. Evolution is a light illuminating all facts, a curve that all lines must follow. Okay, he speaks like a man in love. But the point is he has taken away the solid Thomistic metaphysics, Aristotelian metaphysics of 2,500 years, and replaced it with this new system that, as Bert says, the system will be pitiful, inadequate, and even fantastic. Now, there's one final point I want to make, and that is I want to answer the claim that because I am talking the way I am about the problems with modern scientists, this will be interpreted as that, well, of course, he's a religious man, so he's against science. This is one of the most stupid claims that can be made, but at the same time, it's very common. It's very common just to dismiss anybody giving a philosophical or religious argument in the face of science. No, we're talking about the limitations of science. The biologist can disprove the existence of God. And here's an example. Think about this. Just suppose a wife says to her husband, honey, would you mind vacuuming the living room today? Oh, yeah, I'll do it. So he vacuums the living room, and then when he's done, he leaves the vacuum, plump, right in the middle of the living room. 1 hour goes by. 2 hours go by. 3 hours go by. The wife sees the husband walking past the vacuum cleaner, going in there with the ham sandwich in front of the television, with the vacuum cleaner there. And the wife says to the husband at one point, honey, the vacuum doesn't belong there. So he reacts by getting up, picking up the vacuum, and throwing it in the trash. And the wife says, what are you doing? Oh, well, you said it shouldn't be there. You said that to get rid of it, to get it out of the living room. She said, no, I didn't say that means to throw it away. I said, please put it in its proper place. It has a place and that place is not in the middle of the living room. That place is in the closet where we store it. Okay? Well, this is what I see arrogant and stupid university professors, scientists, and television commentators. This is how they react to the type of arguments I've been giving. Oh, well, they say they just get rid of science. We don't need science. That's typical religious people. They just say we don't need science. No, I'm not saying that at all. Like the vacuum cleaner that has to be put in its proper place, science too has to remain in its proper place, in that science, empirical science, and all the glories and wonderful things that it brings us, it explains many truths, but it does not explain all truth. And this is the superstition that modern man has to break himself from. This false idea that because modern science dazzles us, and it does, it dazzles me. I don't know how they send rockets to the moon. I don't know how they design my iPod Touch. I have no idea, don't have a clue, and I'm fascinated by it and respect the scientists who do it, but science doesn't explain everything. It requires more. It requires an understanding of a great being who is beyond matter, beyond time, beyond anything we can conceive, but this great being is someone to whom we can reason. Our reason can bring us to the conclusion of his existence, and that is what we're going to do in the next program.